Free speech said, "Watch out! This man's got a bookshelf in the background." Free speech. Okay, so I guess let's get this show on the road. I don't have a fancy little camera or anything for me, but I think that will be okay. So, hey there, Josh. How are you? Can you hear me? You can't talk yet. Oh, you gotta unmute yourself. There you go.
Can I talk now?
Yep. There you are.
Oh, cool. It said I didn't have permission to speak, so I don't know if it was like a subtle. You're not supposed to talk,
Did my permissions? I set the room to where it's supposed to automatically mute everyone. Marco said it didn't work, and and everyone else seems to have been talking fine. So I assumed my permissions did not work. So apologize if they suddenly did start working. But anyhow,
right.
So Marco's going to be sort of recording the discussion. Kind of want to just go over your position. I'll talk a little bit about my positions as well, the things that I hold. So I have a number of objections that I usually raise against presuppositionalism, depending on like what's the specific topology of presup that you hold to.
Sure.
So we sort of started to talk about it last night, got interrupted and stuff. So, but I just kind of want to start over for the sake of the crowd here because a lot of these guys weren't there. So, what is the denomination that you said you were part of? Was it Presbyterian, if I remember right?
Yeah, so I kind of just switched over from being a Baptist to Presbyterian, just kind of based on some infant baptism covenant stuff, which doesn't really hold a lot of water here. But yeah, I'd fall under the Presbyterian, Reformed, post millennial camp.
Okay, and so as far as like, can you give me kind of the components of the Presbyterian presup position? Because I'm not familiar with, because I like I said, I've dealt with Baptist presups, I've dealt with Calvinists, I've dealt with, and all of them seem to have some kind of different stances on different topics. So let's talk a little bit about ontology, epistemology, your axiology, all that kind of compounded together. Is probably going to be something about God, but specifically things like universals, those sorts of topics are usually the ones where they differ. Like, do you believe in universals, or do you like the realm of forms, or are you think it's Orthodox do that one? That's one of theirs. What are the basics of the positions?
I guess I would come more from like a Greg Bonson, Cornelius Van Til kind of like presuppositional camp, meaning that they would put metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics solely components that you can only really make sense of in the Christian worldview, i.e., starting with God as the foundation for truth, knowledge, and morality. That's kind of that's a real short gist of it. I'm not actually sure if I've talked to anybody that is a pre-supper that would have a different view. So I'm curious to see who you've talked to or what they've said that would kind of differ from that foundation. I think
So Darth Dawkins is Ventilian. He also uses some Bonson. And then there's other ones like J. Robin uses, I think, Bonson is his favorite usually.
Cool. Yeah.
If I remember right. I might be wrong on that one because it's been a long time since I've really dealt with J. Robin. Some of the other ones like G.I. Jew, he's not a fan of Bonson, partially because Bonson's like his whole thing was like you're just trying to shut the mouth of the non-believer. And so it ends up being more like an attack on the non-believer and not really actually an attempt at saving their soul or anything. He's more interested in he wants to proselytize. And then there's other ones like Jay Dyer. Jay Dyer does not hold to anything like that. So his presuppositional methodology is going to be around the Eastern Orthodox Church. So basically you have to have his specific Eastern Orthodox position in order for it to work. Some of the Calvinists are going to hold different things about like morality and determinism and free will and stuff. So and most presubs hold to some sort of like either a compatibilist or libertarian sense of free will. The Calvinists usually completely reject that. They say
compatibilist.
They just say completely deterministic. So they just completely say no, there is no such thing as free will. It's utter nonsense, and you're either predestined for heaven or predestined for hell. Then the Calvinists are also going to have like the 5 tenets or whatever the whatever they're called, the
5 points.
Depravity, absolute depravity, and the 5 point the Calvin system. So they sort of mesh that in there and say you have to have that for
limited atonement. Yeah.
And then there's other ones like I've talked about, like Matt Yester has his very elongated version where he says he has like basically it's a 3-tiered argument. The first tier is a disjunctive. So either the God worldview or the not God worldview is true. His second argument is going to be if the not God worldview is true, then the not God worldview can account for X, Y, or Z, whatever kind of into something that they think is intelligible. Then he goes down to another argument where when you try to account for it, he gives you a reductio ad absurdum. He fills that reductio ad absurdum back into the second argument where he says something like, okay, so modus tollens, if you can't account for this, if your worldview can't account for this, then it can't be the right view. And so this lends evidence to that the God worldview is true. So my objection to essentially, which this is a topology of the tag argument, my objection to all the tag arguments is that I think I can actually grant the entirety of the argument and the conclusions. It's still this is what I call. I've started calling it the deliverance problem. So I think that you can grant the entirety of the argument, everything a Presup would say, and they still can't deliver on their conclusion, even in principle. So the idea is that, let's say I say, you're attacking every worldview out there, right? So like the goal and what you would have to do to come to the conclusion that the God worldview is true via this methodology would be to have some way to falsify every other possible worldview, not just the worldviews that you encounter in the real world, but you'd have to falsify all of them. And you would have to attack even the ones that are just hypotheticals, the ones that are just conceptual out there that you and I think that's a very high task. And I don't think it's possible to do it. And part of the reason why is because I think that there's not a falsification criterion for every given worldview. So some worldviews, like the one I gave you the other night was trivialism. Yes, there really are trivialists. Some of them are things like some Eastern religions. They're fine with strict senses of contradictions, literally P and not P, being true simultaneously is not an issue. So deriving a contradiction from the worldview, they say, yeah, it's just how it is. And then some of them would just be like, they would say something along the lines of like, any reductio, they might just bite the bullet. So like a reductio for the Calvinistic position is that God has literally made you with the intent, if you're an atheist, right, and you spend your whole life being an atheist, he made you with the intent of you being an atheist and you suffering for all eternity. Now this sounds about as evil as a being could be. They have ways of trying to dance around that, like what does evil mean and stuff, and that just kind of it's a red herring to the topic. But I don't think there's a way to deal with God in a way that he's made you such that you would go to hell with that as the intent of your existence, for you to suffer for all eternity. And that's not even going to be symmetrical with the Bible. Like the Bible says that God wills that we would all go to heaven, that no one would be in the fires of hell, so to speak. Like that's part.
And none shall perish.
Yeah, he wills that. So it's not even it's there are there's explicit contradictions within the Calvinistic approach. Now the Calvinist just bites the bullet on this, right? They say yeah, that's true. Now they also pretend to hold to the law of non-contradiction. I don't think that they do. I think that they make some mistakes there. But there's some worldviews that are just not falsifiable in principle because they don't hold to some of the core tenets. So you have to have some kind of overlap of understanding for a worldview to be analyzable on the grounds of another worldview. So essentially what I'm saying is that I think presuppositional methodology makes the mistake of assuming that you can do an internal critique for every worldview, and that's just not the case. So I'll start there and kind of get your feedback on what you think about that topic and about that argument.
Yeah, I mean, we can go, I think, as a, presuppositionalist or whatever. I mean, we're all presuppositionalists because we all have presuppositions, but from a Christian worldview presuppositional standpoint, I think, we can even talk about some of the things that you said. I think I would disagree with a few of them, quite honestly, about kind of Calvinism and what they think and what they believe, about, God desiring, people to go to hell versus, a contradiction in the Bible you might say is like, oh, well, he doesn't desire anybody to perish. I don't think that's what those verses are talking about. And I think that when we look at them in context, you can see that they're to a specific people about a specific people. So I don't think that it's God desires people to go to hell and then doesn't. I don't think he works like that. But I would start off as a presuppositionalist with your worldview and why you have an issue with any of those things morally. Or I would start with, how do you know anything at all, epistemologically speaking? What's your basis for knowledge? And then how do you know things are true? Like, that's really what I think And I know you said the guy that doesn't like Greg Bonson because he said his goal is to like shut the mouth of the non-believer, which I have heard him say that. I don't think that his goal is to make people feel silly, but I think his goal is to hold to a biblical perspective, like when it says, I think it's in Proverbs when it says, "The fool says in his heart there is no God." That's not God calling non-believers fools. Sorry, that's just it's a kind of a spiritual, assessment of people's position, without starting with God. That's what God would say. Whether or not that's true or not, I mean, I believe it's true, obviously, but Greg Montz is not trying to be like a jerk. That's just kind of what he's saying, and he's talking to believers about how they're to talk to non-believers. I don't think he would ever say that to a non-believer, like, "Hey, I'm just trying to shut your mouth." So prophetizing before sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna kind of get in there on a couple of things. So first, did any of the people that God was talking to when He said, "I would will that none perish, but all have everlasting life"? Did any of those people potentially go to hell, or were they all just predestined for heaven? Because He said He willed that they would go to heaven, right?
Rules are really something.
So I think the Calvinist position is that God does what He wants, right? If we're talking about the triune, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as the one being of God, like He doesn't exist in our world, right? I think the typical Christian would understand that God is the creator and sustainer of all things, and that He does what He wills, He does what He wants. So I don't necessarily think it's that God has predestined people to go to hell. I think that God has not chosen to save certain people and chosen to save other people, and that's based solely on His will, not on anything that we've done. That's kind of the Calvinistic versus the Arminian position. Like the Arminian position says, "Hey, God looked through time and He chose. He saw that you did something good and He liked you." I don't think that's not my position. But so I would say no. Anybody that God, He wanted to save but didn't save, that can't happen.
Okay, so if God wills that everyone goes to heaven, then everyone goes to heaven. Do you agree that
Sure.
proposition would be true?
If,
so either
sure.
so then either God did will that everyone goes to heaven, or God did not will that everyone goes to heaven. Do you agree?
Sure.
Is there a passage that God did will everyone that all would go to heaven?
No.
So you just think that passage is either false, or it's talking specifically in a context. So like, who is He talking to, and did all those people certainly go to heaven?
Yeah, I would say I think it's in 2 Timothy where it says God, He wants all men to come to know Him. It's actually specifically talking. You'd have to read it from the Greek from the start, right? You can't read things back into themselves. It's talking about all kinds of men, right? Because it's quoting, specifically kings and rulers and these types of people. So it's not saying everybody that ever lived, God wills to go to heaven or to be saved, I think is what it is. But that's what I would say.
So, but did all the ones that He was specifically talking about, did all of those people go to heaven? The ones that He's actually specifically talking about that you're saying?
I mean, yeah, I don't know who exactly those people are, but yes, I would say if God says, "Hey, I'm going to save these people will be saved."
Okay, so you just hold that God was talking about a specific set of people. That specific set of people definitely did go to heaven. And that's your solution to the. I don't think the Calvinists hold. I don't know if they hold that position necessarily. I'm fine with I don't want to get into the semantics. I find the theological part of the discussion kind of boring. I think there's a lot of semantic sort of runarounds that you get when you get into the theological discussions about things. And so many different positions, it becomes impossible to give a cogent critique. However, a methodology I can critique, right? So my critique of the method is that it can't in principle deliver on its conclusions. And I would be curious to see, can you show me that it can in principle deliver on its conclusion, and if so, how?
What is the conclusion that you think that Calvinists are trying to deliver?
Not Calvinism, but presuppositional methodology.
Sure.
So presuppositional methodology claims that they can demonstrate the truth of God, right? By demonstrating the falsity of all other worldviews, right? So no other worldview can do it. Can you, in principle, falsify every other worldview, and if so, how?
So I'll answer that two ways. I think yes, but I don't think that's the presuppositional worldview. the presuppositional worldview says that you can't know anything without starting with the Christian God. So that would be kind of the difference in what you said, in that I know that Hinduism, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Roman Catholics, I know they're all wrong because I can find something wrong with what they're saying, which I think we can, honestly. I really think we could go through systematically by the numbers. Hey, what's up with the Bhagavad Gita? Hey, what's up with Mormons? Like, we could do that. I don't think that's the presuppositional claim, though. At least that's not my claim.
So if it is one of the Presup claims, and it's one that usually you'll find often on Discord, is that they'll say that. Now that doesn't have to be your claim. You can make whatever claims you want. So your claim though was that you can't know anything without God. So I think in principle you also can't demonstrate that. So I'm curious, how could you? What's the method by which you would demonstrate it's impossible to know anything without God?
Yeah, I think that. Let me rephrase that. It's impossible to account for knowledge without God. Like, I think you know things. I think I know things. I think everybody in the chat knows things, and they act on those things as if they are true and if they are relevant, moral or immoral. Excuse me. I think that it's proven by the impossibility of the contrary. I think that when we get down to it, your worldview, if it's not a God worldview, is unable to account for how you know things, for what is true, and for why we should do anything at all, right? Morality.
So let's focus on the claim here, though. So because the claim is not that my worldview can't account for it, it's that any worldview in principle can't account for it, right? So what would be the method by which we would demonstrate that? Because what you said is that, I think you would have to go through every potential worldview if you do the negative case, or you'd have to do the positive case. So you'd have to demonstrate to me that your worldview can, in fact, account for these things, and that it's absolutely the case that you can. And then that wouldn't prove the impossibility of the contrary, because I think that there's maybe there's more than one worldview that could do it. I don't know. But at the same time, if you're claiming the impossibility of the contrary, you would have to make both the negative, and you'd absolutely have to make the positive and the negative case here, right? So you'd have to make the negative case is you're going to have to show that every other worldview, every potential worldview, cannot do that. And so what's the methodology by which you reach to that conclusion?
I think, honestly, for me, and I'm not trying to make this a nanny boo boo thing, but I think I would focus on what you believe, right? What is your worldview, and how does your worldview account for truth, knowledge, morality, laws of logic, principle of induction, universal, truths that we have? How does your worldview do it? Because you said I would have to kind of take every other worldview and disprove them, which I think we probably could. But I want to focus on you.
I'm sure you do. I get this a lot from Presups. They want to focus on one thing, and that is, let me attack your worldview. But what I want to do here is,
I don't want to attack you.
Let's say I surrender. You win. My worldview is false. Have you proven the impossibility of the contrary? No. Right. So I asked for a methodology for that conclusion. That's what I want from you, as a method for that conclusion.
Excellent.
Because that according to you, that's your claim, is that no other worldview, it's impossible for any worldview other than the Christian worldview to account for knowledge, right? So let's say I throw my hands in the air. I surrender. My worldview can't account for these things, and I actually think there are problems with my worldview. In fact, I can identify them. I'm aware of the problems with my worldview.
Yeah, I've heard.
I'm surrendering. So what's your methodology for reaching the conclusion? Because we're not there yet, right? We've falsified one potential worldview. What's the next move?
Well, honestly, the next move is you're now a Christian. Honestly,
well, no, I'm not. Of course not.
I think they're. I understand that.
There's a
I'm just saying
of other views, right? You falsified my view. You haven't substantiated yours, right? That doesn't substantiate yours, right? If I falsify, if I say, you know what, I'm looking for my hat, and I search everywhere in my bedroom, and I've searched every nook and cranny to the point that it is exhaustively not the case that it is in my room. Have I proved where my hat is? No, right? I haven't. So the claim is that you want me to be a Christian, but you haven't demonstrated that that all the worldviews are false yet. You've just falsified one, but that doesn't make me a Christian. That just makes me go, okay, well, now I need to know which one's true. If it's not mine, we have lots and lots and lots of possibilities. There's tons of them. And the Christian worldview, I haven't successfully falsified them under this hypothetical, right? But why am I a Christian? Why am I not these other ones? Supposedly you have an argument for how you falsify those, right?
Am I listening to something else? Am I an idiot? Hold on one second. Dude, I'm so sorry.
You're okay.
I clicked on the call-in thing, and it was like playing in my ear.
Oh, I've done that before.
Yeah, I guess I would say like one. I don't think you become a Christian because you figured out some truth, or like, oh, now you falsified all these other worldviews and this is the only one that I choose to believe. I think that you have to look at kind of your motivation behind wanting to know what's true, wanting to know what's good, and wanting to know what's beautiful. Because you're even asking me, and we talked about last night, you're asking me all these truth claims and like prove your position. I would say why? Like, why is it important that you know what's true? How do you know what's true? Right. And then how do we differentiate between right and wrong? I'm again saying that like you can't know that apart from God, who he is, what he's done, who you are in light of that, i.e. your identity, and then how you are to live. Now, I think everybody, I think the law of God is written on everybody's hearts. I think we're all created in the image of God. So I think that's how you do know certain things to be true or assume them to be true, i.e. morality. Like if I've had discussions with people and they're like, hey, I don't believe you should impose your morality on other people. And I'm like, no, I thank God that you will impose your morality on other people, because if somebody tries to kidnap my daughter, you as my friend would stop them, right? That's a morality. You're imposing your will on somebody else because they want to do something that you know is bad.
Sure. I'm in agreement with you on a couple of these things. I think there are goods and bads. I'm totally on board. So, but the question remains, because I'm asking for a methodology, because Presup makes a mighty claim, but the deliverance problem is what I'm on here. This is the deliverance criticism.
Oh, yeah.
I think in principle, I think you actually don't know how to deliver on this conclusion. And I want to know. I want to know that you can. You should be able to explain it to me. If you've actually come to this conclusion, you should have a methodology by which you have falsified every other potential worldview, all of them, right? Even the hypothetical ones, even alien ones, right? So alien worldviews, alien gods, and alien deities. And I'm curious, have you actually done that? And if you have, just in all honesty, have you done that?
Yeah, I guess I would just. So to most worldviews, yes, I have done that. I think the presuppositional argument is not, again, hey, we need to falsify these other worldviews to know that ours is true. Again, I think that if you don't start with the Christian worldview, you can't know anything to be true at all, right? You're just kind of assuming.
Sure. So why do you think that then? I'll put aside the deliverance argument for a moment, because I think that the conclusion, like you saying, only the God worldview can do it. I'm asking, how do you get to that conclusion? What's your method?
I mean, honestly, I would say it's more of a supernatural, type of thing where God opens, your eyes, so to speak. I guess that's more of a metaphor, but in terms of like, it says in the Bible that repentance comes before the knowledge of the faith, right? I think that faith is a gift of God. And I think that until your eyes are open, you're probably not really going to see, no matter how much I talk at you or talk to you or how good of friends we become. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just don't think it answers the question. Like, I just don't think it answers.
Sure.
So if I make a claim, right, and you go something like, well, but why do you think that? Like when I make a moral claim or something like that, you're going to go, but why, how do you know that? Right. That's what you're going to ask. And so what I'm doing is I'm presenting to you, I'm saying, okay, cool. So in the same way, you have this claim that it's impossible without God. And presumably you've come to that conclusion by some method, some way. Either that, or you're just kind of like throwing out a conclusion that you haven't actually come to, right? And if you grant that you don't have that as a conclusion, that maybe it's you have insufficient evidence, or maybe you haven't done it for every potential worldview or something, because this is a strong claim. It's not a weak claim. It's not like it's not something I think that maybe only my worldview can do this. You're saying no. It's actually the case. If you don't start with God, you can't know anything. And this isn't just like some presupposition, right? If it is just a presupposition you hold to, then it's just a axiomatic. I just think this is true, and there's not reasons behind it. Now, presumably, I think you're a rational being, and that you actually have reasons you believe this is the case. And so I'm asking, what's that set of reasons? Is it a methodology by which you've reached this conclusion, or is it something that you believe in virtue of some sort of inductive process, or is it like a deductive claim? Like what's the motivation behind this sort of a presumption? Why would I theoretically accept this? What would be the reasons?
Well, like, I mean, going back to what the Bible says, I don't think you could theoretically accept it unless there's been a heart change, right? The heart being the seat of your emotion, um, and what is controlling, how you feel and what you believe. But I would say again, the impossibility of the contrary. I think if we were to get down to it and we were to ask you questions on how you know what you know, why you believe what you believe, who you think you are identity wise, how you behave ethically or morally, and why we should impart our ethics or morality on other people. I think that when we start talking about how we're even able to have this conversation with universal laws of logic that we're all adhering to, that are invariant, abstract, I think that I would hope that you would come to know and understand that it would be impossible to know those things without starting with the Christian God, because I
Do
think
you
that
mean when you say impossible? Because I want to make sure our language is like being used
yeah,
consistently. Because
for
we use
sure.
it as a term, so I just want to clarify a question. Then you keep going.
Mhm.
When you say impossible, do you mean it like it entails a contradiction?
Uh, I'm not as smart as you, so that confuses me. I'm saying it. Like
What does it mean to say something the contrary is impossible? What does impossible mean?
like it cannot happen. I.e., like I don't think that you or anybody else, and I mean this like super nice. So that's just what I believe. Not trying to be like a jerk or anything. I don't think that people can know things epistemologically speaking. I don't think people can have a foundation for their morality or a foundation for truth claims without starting with the Christian God. Now, I think people do know things. I think people do behave ethically and morally. And I think people do know truth, but they don't. No, I'm okay. Thank you. But they don't start with God. So they're not able to justify those claims.
So
Does that make
so
more
this
sense?
again doesn't it still doesn't answer the question. So I get that you think the
Mm-hmm.
impossibility of the contrary is true, but
Mm-hmm.
my question is, so one
On
I'm asking.
methodology?
So yeah, one I'm asking about the
Mm-hmm.
methodology. If it's just to falsify my worldview, that's just insufficient for the claim. The claim is too
Yeah.
strong for that to be the conclusion of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the second issue I see is that if we're talking about possibility and impossibility, just saying it can't happen is insufficient as a definition, right? So like when I say I can't jump to the moon, right? That's a topology of impossibility. What I mean by that is something along the lines of
Mm-hmm.
like within the laws of the physics or something like that. This is not something that I'm capable of doing. Then there might be a broader type of modality. Maybe there's something like metaphysical modality. Like can't metaphysically happen for some set of reasons. But it's not quite as wide as like logical modality. Logical modality is like just saying this happening would entail a contradiction, and that's what I mean when I say
Mm-hmm.
necessary, right? So when I talk about necessity, I'm talking about that type of necessity usually. Now, if
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about another type of necessity, I'll specify it for you. I'll say like nomologically, it's impossible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you say impossible, what type of modality are you using? What's the scope we're talking about? Is what I'm asking for.
I guess the scope would be everything, right? I don't think that you can justify to me how you know things to be true without God. So I'm not really sure as like modality wise what you're talking about, but I would say that if because you already you're like we're all making truth claims, we're all making knowledge claims, and you're actually making moral claims as well, saying hey that doesn't justify this and that. I would want to know on what foundation are you making those claims? You know what I mean? Like my foundation is God, his word, his character, his nature and being. What is your foundation for saying, "Hey, Josh, you can't do that." You know what I mean?
Well, I haven't said you can't do it. Like you can do it. I don't have an objection to you just saying things, right? But presumably you're trying to be rational about this. So you have this view that you keep espousing. You keep saying,
Mm-hmm.
"I think
Mm-hmm.
you can't do this," and I keep asking you,
Mm-hmm.
"Yeah, but why?" And the answer just
Mm-hmm.
always ends up turning back around to "I think you can't do this," and the answer and there, and I go, "But why?" And then you go, "Well, because let's talk about your worldview and how you." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, but you didn't say that. You didn't. What you didn't say usually is like when you say you, presumably you're not just talking
Mm-hmm.
about just my worldview, right? Like I said, I
Mm-hmm.
already surrendered. I threw up my hands, said, "Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't. I
Mm-hmm.
think there are issues within my worldview. Honestly, I'm being totally real. We would probably
Yeah.
get up to a very high level because we would be talking about things that would probably bore the hell out of this room. We'd close down the room. Everyone would leave and run away from me. No one would want to talk to me if I started talking about the issues with my views because I know
Yeah.
the issues. I have some type of criticism for them. So I have
Mm-hmm.
there are actually specific problems that I don't
Yeah.
know the exact
Oh, yeah.
solution for. There's something close to a solution, but I don't know if it's right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But so I'm throwing up my hands. And I'm going, but wait a second. But you have a very strong claim here. I don't think you're just saying just me, not just Tart Vader can't account for these things. No
Yeah.
one without God can do it, right? And the question is
Yeah.
how do you know that?
I mean, the ultimate answer is by revelation, right? So that's what we would say. If we're on the same page, there's only three ways that you know things epistemologically: empiricism, rationalism, or revelation. So we would say it's a revelational epistemology, and that God has revealed himself to us through his word. And that is how we know things about God, and that is how we know things in general. So that would be my foundation. Now, if for like our little thought experiment here, like when you say you're like, I'm throwing the towel, cool. I think it's difficult to, as a Christian, to not get sucked into like an intellectual battle where you want to like look better than everybody or talk down to people. Really, it should come down to evangelism. Like the people you're talking about, that if they're Christians and they espouse a presuppositional worldview or apologetic methodology, like they should be just trying to tell you how good God is while still casting down what we would call negative arguments. Paul would call negative arguments, against the faith. So it shouldn't be about them, just saying, hey, you're an idiot. It should really be them trying to demonstrate to you who God is and how good he is. And I think that one way that they try to do that, or we should try to do that, is by confronting your actual worldview. So like I said, I do think that we can dismantle the Hare Krishna worldview. I do think that we can dismantle the Mormon worldview. But I'm happy to have the discussion right now, but I want to focus on what you believe and why you believe it. Because again, I don't think
I get that, and this is the thing with like a lot of presuppositional apologetics. They'll say, I want to X, right? I want to focus on your worldview. I understand that you desire that. But I've made a claim, right? And you've made a claim, and we're talking about those claims. Now, what you're claiming is a far, far stronger claim, because I'm not claiming that without my worldview you do X, Y, or Z, right? I didn't mean anything like that. But you've
Is
made a
that
very
better?
strong claim, and you've said something like the revelation of God. So this is where I want to go into my second argument. So this is my second sort of attack on presuppositional apologetics. I think that presuppositional apologetics is just as vulnerable to any skeptical scenario around knowledge as any other view is, and I can kind of demonstrate it. So let's start with, you have the revelation of God, and that's why you believe. That's the reason that you gave why you think you can't have knowledge without God. So I want to present to you one skeptical scenario, and I want to see how your worldview specifically solves it in such a way that no other worldview can attack it. Let's just go with Descartes' demon, right? So let's go with, we have an evil genius that is always tricking you, and he's using evil very like broadly speaking. So evil genius, he's tricking you, he's trying to deceive you, and at every turn, all of your beliefs are being pre-programmed against your will, against anything that you want. You don't have any control over it. You're a puppet. Unbeknownst to you, all of your beliefs are in fact false. How would you go about falsifying this beliefs, or this system, like this demon? What's the method by which your specific brand of presuppositionalism would falsify this being?
So am I talking to this demon at this point? Am I like, hey, bro, this is what I think and what I know? Or am I like still
Well,
like,
so
you know what I
presumably
mean?
for your claim, like you said, God's revealing it. But I'm asking you, how do you know that that's not the demon?
Oh, sure. So how do you know that it's actually God speaking to you or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say that God's clearly revealed himself in his word, and that not only has he demonstrated himself throughout history, but also his word and also in creation. And again, a possibility of the contrary. I don't think that we can know anything without starting with him. I think that we're kind of left in this world of absurdity, unable to answer all the questions, the most basic questions of life, quite frankly, without God, even though people try to. So how do you know it's not a demon talking to you? Well, again, I'd say God has clearly revealed himself. So like,
Yes,
if
the point is,
somebody,
it's the demon that's revealed himself, but he's pretending to be this deity you call God. How do you know that that's not the case?
again, because I think God's clearly spoken to where I'm able to recognize what is evil and what would be considered a demon and demon-like behavior, and I'm able to understand that if somebody's saying, hey, you should love your neighbor, versus the demon saying, hey, you should eat your neighbor, I'm able to recognize that based on God and his nature and character, meaning Deuteronomy 6:5, do no harm to your neighbor, love your neighbor, right?
Sure.
But
So
I
what's
think
the
it's very
what's the
clear.
method though by which you've know this? Is it like what was the because if it's the demon
Yeah.
telling you this, surely the liar that
Mhm.
says they're telling the truth is not necessarily telling the truth, right? Like, and also all your other beliefs are being manipulated. So all your beliefs about morality, he's flipped them upside down. None of that's true. All of your beliefs about like even reasons to believe things are completely non-existent. There's actually not a reason. Everything's irrational. He's just tricking you. He's deceiving you to make you think all these things that this God, you've got this Bible, and the demon wrote it, and he wrote every word of it, all of it, and he's tricked you to believe it's good and that it's right. He's tricked you to believe that his voice is all of this is coming from him. How would you go about, what's the method by which you would go about falsifying this?
Well, again, it would be God revealing himself to us. So not only, it's not
That
like
would
I
be
just,
symmetrical with the demon though, right?
I mean, in your scenario, yes. In my scenario, no. Again, and in this scenario, I would say for me and you, even doing the scenario, what is right and wrong? How do we know it's true? And how do we know anything at all? Right? Like, what's our basis for this? Well, mine is God. What's yours to bring the scenario to me to say this demon's tricking me? How would I recognize the demon's tricking me? Well, I would say it's because God's revealed himself. It's just kind of
Okay, so the point
almost
of
a
the
catch-22.
yeah, the point of the thought experiment is that if your worldview is true, right, and it's in fact a demon that's tricking you, then you can't, in principle, know it. That should be your answer: is
Yeah.
that you couldn't know it, right? Because if you can only know things if God is the one revealing them to you, um, then under this condition, you wouldn't be able to know anything. Now, the problem is that if there's at least one condition under which you don't know anything, and God is a necessary being, right? God exists in every possible world, then there can't be a world in which you don't know something, right? So under this condition, if you don't know something, and we're saying here's a condition under which you don't know something, then and God is the thing making knowledge possible in every possible world, and there's at least one possible world, one where we don't have there's no way to falsify it, there's no way to know it, right? In that world, you're saying I can't know anything, then it just follows that God's not necessary, right? Wouldn't that follow
I
from
mean,
that
I guess I would
definition?
just. I mean, I think I don't think so. I think that the parameters that you're giving already are displaying that you have a worldview to which you can know things for certain, because that's you're saying things that you think are true. Um, Ethics, morality, which you are saying, hey, some things are right, some things are wrong. I would say, by what standard are you making these claims? You know what I mean? How does it logically follow that God is not necessary? Like, and is that right or wrong?
But remember,
Again,
I've
this
already,
would.
I've already granted the fallibility of my world. It's your worldview that you think is infallible, right? So this shouldn't be possible. There
Yeah.
should not be any condition. You should be able to
Yeah.
falsify this demon. You should be able to know if God is in every possible world, and God is revealing to you somehow that this demon is false. You should have a method to do so. Now, if you don't have a method to do so, and you can't falsify the demon, then it just follows from that there's at least one world where you don't know things, right? So if there's this world, there's this demon. He's tricking everyone. He's got the Bible he's made, and he's convinced you, and in such a way he's revealed himself to you in such a way that you can know that he is God. But in reality, he's not that being that you think he is. He's a very tricksy sucker, right? Now, you need a method by which to falsify this being. Otherwise, it's going to come down to there's at least one possible world where you don't have knowledge. Now, if God's the precursor for knowledge, that should be impossible because God is necessary, right? So that's where I'm
Sure.
pointing to and going, okay, so what would be your method? Because your worldview, it seems like let's say I accept your
Mhm.
worldview, how do I do it, right? What do I do?
Mhm. Yeah, I would say that even by you saying that I should do things and we should do things, those are moral traits that you're adhering to and appealing to, and I would want to know on what basis. And
Well,
then two,
I just
you
said,
say that
if
you.
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was saying, like you're saying, like, hey, I accept your worldview. Now prove it. You haven't
Hmm.
actually accepted my worldview, right? That's just kind of a thought experiment. So you're kind of putting me in this weird box, which is fine, to where I'm trying to explain to you things that if you had actually accepted them, you wouldn't really be asking those questions. You know
Well,
what I mean?
presume
You would have
so.
given yourself over to God and then you would have had a foundation for truth, knowledge, and morality. An ultimate
So
foundation,
presumably
ultimately.
to critique a worldview, I've got to be able to play with like for instance, are you going to play with
Yeah.
some hypotheticals with my worldview? Let's say I was like to backtrack and say, okay, cool, I'll
No.
give you my worldview. Are you going to play with some hypotheticals and do some scenarios and maybe attack the worldview in some way, or maybe
No,
just
I don't
show
think
that it
so.
doesn't? You don't think you would do anything with that? What would you do then? Just ask questions, or?
I mean, ultimately, yeah. So typically, when I'm actually like, not that we're not friends, but like when I have friends at work, I do encourage them to talk to me about their worldview, and then I would kind of point out some inconsistencies. And it doesn't always go, I'm not trying to change
Well,
his mind here. I'm just here
Well,
hanging
but
out.
then you and I are
But
now we're agreeing then though that inconsistencies are a problem, right? So you and I are making that agreement. Now, I think that if we agree that inconsistencies are a problem, and I identified what seems to be an inconsistency in your worldview. Now you don't think it's an inconsistency, and I'm asking, but why? Why is that not inconsistent?
I guess I would say we do agree that inconsistency are like a problem. But
Hmm.
my question to you is, well, why are they a problem in your worldview? They're a problem in my worldview because God has clearly spoken. God is truth. God does not like, lying. Like,
So
why is
would
it a problem in your worldview?
me answering that question in some way falsify the demon, or would it somehow answer my question? Because it seems like you're changing the subject, right? So like, if me answering that
Mhm.
question would somehow answer my question,
Mhm.
cool. I'll do my best. But the question is
Yeah.
if it doesn't answer my question, right? Then all we've done
Mhm.
is we've just changed the topic. Like we haven't even. It's like rather than going if when the kid says, why should I do this, and you go, well, why are you asking why you should do it? Well, because presumably, I need reasons, but that doesn't answer the why I should do it, right? That I even if I could hypothetically answer the question, you know,
Mhm.
given I've successfully answered the question to you to your satisfaction, like what would this tell me about the question that I've asked you, right? About this evil demon and how you would go about knowing
Mhm.
this evil demon is not there.
Yeah, I guess to the evil demon question, I would say that's not possible. I would say in God's worldview, it's not possible for a demon to come in there and tell people that, he's God and somehow trick him into believing that he's God, although demons are supernatural beings. I would say that doesn't really happen, and that can't actually happen, especially to a Christian. So I guess that would be my first problem with the scenario.
Well, why couldn't it happen to a Christian though? Like, what's the what? Because presumably there's a way that that
Mhm.
can't happen. I'm questioning like, what is that?
Yeah, I would say that Christians, they're protected by God, and not only physically and spiritually are they protected by God, but God promises that not that no harm is going to come to us, but I mean, if you read in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, especially in Revelation, it talks about Satan being bound; he can't deceive the nations. And I would think that would carry over into whatever demonic power they think they might have. They don't have the demonic power that they had over Rome and kind of the ancient civilizations. Um, so I would say, one, the Bible tells you right there that you really don't have to be afraid of demons and that stuff. And I think that some professing Christians do not do a good job of reading their Bibles, and they give in to that sort of fear of demons and Satan, type stuff. Um, but yeah, I would. I mean, you're also armed with the truth. You're armed with the Bible,
So it
and you're
seems like
able to
though,
understand.
if the Bible's the one telling you that you shouldn't be afraid of demons, and within
Mm-hmm.
this hypothetical I'm offering, the demon is the one who wrote that, right? He's the one who said, "Hey, you shouldn't be afraid of demons," and he's saying that I'm
Sure,
God and that there's I don't know if you believe in the Trinity or not, but if you do, he's
I
the
do.
Trinity. He's all symmetrical with the being that you call God, with one exception. He is
Mm-hmm.
attempting to and apparently successfully doing so, deceiving you. Now, presumably, in this world, you wouldn't know anything because, according to your claim, God is necessary for knowledge, and this deity has at
Mm-hmm.
least one trait different than your God. So,
Yep.
if this has to be an impossible world, then right? So, like, because your God's like a necessary being, as I understand, and so you're going to need a way by which this can't happen. And all you said was that you know God would be the one, but that's
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing we're criticizing here, right? That's going to beg the question, doesn't it?
I mean, it does, but again, I would ask you: is begging the question wrong according to your philosophy of ethics or morality? You know what I mean? And then how do you
So
know,
it's gonna depend by
epistemologically
what you mean by
speaking?
wrong. So like when I say something is wrong in a moralistic sense, that's gonna be one thing. Now when I say in this sense, I'm gonna mean something about like rationality, right? Presumably, like if something is circular, you haven't successfully given a reason, have you? And
Well, I
so
would say all ultimate reasons are circular. I would say your definition of truth, knowledge, and morality is going to be circular in of itself. The question is it going to be a vicious circle? And is it being viciously circular? Is that wrong? And in
well,
what
okay.
worldview?
So
You know what I mean?
okay, so from your view, circles are okay. It just as long as it's a not a vicious circle. So how do you go about distinguishing between a vicious and a virtuous circle? What's the distinction between the two?
So I would say some sort of reasoning that can account, for itself. Hold on one second. I'm sorry. Sorry, I have a bunch of dogs over here. I get mad at the room.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so like what I would say is kind of like, and this might not be you, but when I talk to people, we talk about epistemological positions. The main, empiricism, I'm not a big fan of, but we talk about kind of, rationalism and how they know what they know. Well, they know what they know based on their senses, memory, and reasoning. Well, the problem with that is how do you know your senses and memory and reasoning aren't lying to you? That would be what I would call a vicious circle because your senses, memory, and reasoning cannot account for, your metaphysical, outlook, your ontological outlook. They can't account for your moral outlook. It just tells you, like your eyes see something and it tells you something. It's just a way of processing information. But that's people's one of their most basic epistemological positions. Well, that would be
So
a viciously circular type of reasoning. Whereas I
well,
think that God has clearly revealed himself in that we can know what's true, know what's good, know what's beautiful based on his own nature and character. And I would say that is a circular reasoning because I'm starting with God to get to God, but I don't think it's viciously circular.
so a couple of things here to attack. One, I think that you're going to find that the God circle is not going to have a symmetry breaker between it and any other circular argument. Secondly,
Mm-hmm.
I think that as far as I can tell, um, usually the way the reasoning goes is something like this. So I have these justificatory processes, right? So I've got my if I'm doing like an evidentialist approach, if I'm showing evidence for something, or if I'm going to have sort of the rationalistic approach, like you said, you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned the rationalist approach, so the in true and virtue of meaning, and then you say something like, well, how do you justify those things? So this if and I think that you're going to very quickly run into an issue with the question because the question seems loaded, right? There's an assumption that you can
Mm-hmm.
justify justificatory methods, right? So I'm curious, how does God justify justificatory methods without
Can you
begging the
give
question? Do you think he begs the question, or
no? Can you explain to me justificatory methods real
so
quick? Just
So the
sorry.
justificatory methods are the things you just listed there. So empiricism
Oh,
or
okay.
like
I got you.
methodological naturalism, so the study of the world, that's a
Gotcha.
justificatory method. It's a method by which we know
Okay.
things. So then you
Gotcha.
have rationalism, so like something like some sets of reasons, the laws of logic, those sorts
Mm-hmm.
of things that play into our reasoning
Oh, like
processes. These are all
empiricism.
going to be so deduction is a method of justification. Now the
Mm-hmm.
presumption in the
Mm-hmm.
question is that these methods themselves also require a justification, right? So all
Mm-hmm.
justificatory methods require a justification. So how
But
does
I would
God
say
justify those?
yeah, I mean, not like God doesn't have to, but I would say by what standard are we saying that these justificatory methods need a justification?
Well, that's what you
Like
said.
I'm not saying they need a justification. I'm
Oh,
saying that the
so
only
you
way you can
they
know
don't.
them is, I'm not, yeah, I don't think I said that. If I did, I'm sorry. What I kind of meant was those other worldviews or those other epistemological positions is what I would call them. They fall short because they are viciously circular, meaning my senses of memory and reasoning are, how do I know they're not lying to me? My experiences are not your experiences. So how can I have an epistemological basis based on my own experiences and then expect you to know what I know or hold you to the same standard where you're like, hey, we shouldn't murder. Well, I haven't had an experience where I've been murdered or had murdered or knew somebody that was murdered.
Okay,
That's my
so
issue with that. Yeah.
so if you're not claiming that they need a method of justification, like if you're saying these things don't need a justification, right? If the
Mhm.
justificatory methods don't need a justification, then it wouldn't really
Mhm.
matter whether or not they were viciously or virtuously circular, because like the circularity issue is going to be like an issue with like the justification, right? That's what it means to be a justification issue. So that what you just said was symmetrical with what I said. So if we say
Mhm. Mhm.
it
Mhm.
needs to be virtuously circular to be justified, right, is usually the idea. So if we're saying that these systems are going to be viciously circular and that's why they don't work is because they're not justified, then that's the same thing as saying they need a justification.
Well,
And
they
my
don't work because
question
they don't
is,
start with God, not because they're just viciously circular.
well, what is it
My
about God? So the two questions I have then are, what is it about God that allows them to work? Because presumably, like
or
if
not
God
work.
functions and yeah, or not work, and then the second question is,
Mhm.
what's the symmetry breaker between a vicious circle and a virtuous circle, so that I can kind of analyze the two. Like what when I'm if I'm looking at the two circles, right?
Mhm.
What's going to be
Mhm.
the distinguishing factor between the two?
Yeah, I would say God and not God. That would be my distinction factor. Because again, if we're not starting with God, and we're kind of talking past it a little bit, but like, by what standard are we even critiquing these worldviews? By what standard are we having this discussion? We're
Well,
kind of
I mean,
saying one is good and one's bad, or one's right or one's wrong. But by what standard are we saying that?
well, I haven't
Like
even
I'm,
like said one is right or wrong. All I've asked is like why, because
yeah.
presumably like you as the Presup, you've come to this
Hmm.
conclusion, right? And you're giving me
Hmm.
the explanation as to why. And so we're
Yeah.
getting back to the
Hmm.
vicious and virtuous circle, and that's why you think
Hmm.
that the God worldview is the only one left standing, so to
Hmm.
speak, is like because you've got
Hmm.
the virtuous circle of the God worldview. Now
Hmm.
the problem is though that I'm seeing this would be a critique, because I'm going like, well, but wait a
Hmm.
second, you haven't really told me very much about the circles, right? You said one's got God and
Hmm.
one doesn't, and that's the
Hmm.
distinction between a vicious and a virtuous circle. Is that your answer? Is there more to it?
I would say when we're talking about kind of like ultimate authorities as far as like epistemology or truth or ethics, we'll just kind of keep it simple for those three. Um, yeah, if you don't start with God, that would be a vicious circle, right? And so, what am I even saying here? If I start with myself as true for saying something that's true, like, hey, I'm the perfect father. So I'm going to go off of what I think a perfect father is based on my own fatherhood. The problem is I'm a sinful person, sinful human being, and I'm not a perfect father. I yelled at my kids. I've neglected my kids. I've done all these things. That would be a vicious circle, right? Because I'm starting with myself and ending with myself, meaning I think that I'm the best, but I'm clearly not, right? That's why we have to start with God as the good and perfect Father, right? That's what I would say.
You might be
I'm
using the
trying to like.
language that's something like maybe we can synchronize our language, and we're saying, and
Mhm.
I might be able to understand it a little differently if we do.
Yeah.
So usually the reason that circles are problematic, like the reason like epistemologists are going to say something like circles are problematic, they're going to say something along the lines of, if I'm the standard for the perfect father, and how do I know I'm the standard for the perfect father? Well, I've got the perfect kids. Well, how do I know I have the perfect kid? Because I got the perfect wife, right? How do I know I've got the
Mhm.
perfect wife? Well, because I'm the perfect husband. Well, how do I know I'm the perfect husband? Because I'm the perfect father,
Mhm.
right? This kind of a circle.
Mhm.
Um, the reason it's usually objectionable is because it hasn't been reason giving, right? So is that what you mean when you say a vicious circle is a circle that's not reason giving?
I mean, maybe, but I wouldn't just say that a circle, a viciously circular argument, if it's not viciously circular, it has reasons. I think every circle has reasons. Like, you can give me reasons as to why me being a good father because I have a perfect wife and perfect kids. You can give me reasons. I would say presuppositionally, how do we account for those reasons? Why do we want those reasons? Like, what? That's kind of the goal of presuppositionalism, I think, is to point people back to your own worldview. Like, why do you believe what you believe? Right? I've told you that I believe what I believe because of God, and that might be an oversimplification, which I'm happy to go into. But why do you believe what you believe? Why is a circular reasoning wrong? Like, these are all, I guess,
So the
things that
so the
were.
idea is if we're asking why, like if we're asking for reasons and we're asking for reasons why, the epistemologist can say it's like something like, if something's not reason giving for the belief, right? So they hold that these sort of they call them like internal circles or something like that. It's like basically the small circles, the little ones that people try to reason to, like the one that we just did. So we've got I'm the perfect father. How do I know I'm the perfect father? Because I've got the perfect kids. How do I know I've got the perfect kids? I've got the perfect wife. How do I know I've got the perfect wife? Because I'm the perfect husband. How do I know I'm the perfect husband? Because I'm the perfect father. Now, if this is a vicious circle, and you said the difference between a vicious and a virtuous circle is God. If I pick up that circle and I stick it down and I stick God in it, what changes? What happens? What is it? What's the does it suddenly become valid, or is there still a problem with this circle?
Well, I would say that you would have the proper. I'm not sure exactly how to say it. These are some very interesting ideas. I would say that you actually have the perfect father with which to evaluate whether or not you're a good father or not. Without God, you don't have that.
So how do I know I've got the perfect father here in this other scenario, right? How
do you know God is your perfect father, or how do you know?
Yeah, so you're saying God's the perfect father. How do I know that is it gonna ultimately be circular the way in which I know that God's the perfect father, or is it gonna be like not circular? Because if it's the same circle and all we've done is just made it like I don't know, like God's a component of it, right? Because if you grant that it's ultimately circular, then you know I don't know. I'll just say let's answer the question. What do you think? Is it going to ultimately be circular?
I think two things, right? So as a presuppositionalist, I think that we can't even have this discussion or have, this kind of dialogue without you starting with God for your accounting of knowledge, truth, morality, whatever. So that aside, I again, with this kind of analogy of like, hey, the circular, reasoning with the, I'm a good father because I know I'm a good father. I think that unless you start with God, you can't know that. And you're just making a claim that I'm a good father. And then I think in reality, you're probably not a good father in the first place. Like I kind of told you, I'm not a good father, and how do I know that? Right. That's a moral claim, or my moral foundation. How do I know that I'm not a good father? Is it okay to yell at my kids? It's not okay to yell at my kids. That's the presuppositionalist approach to even hold you to a standard of morality for you to tell me whether or not you're a good father or not. And then I think, when
I'm asking, I don't want to get too far detracted from because I think we're kind of going off a little bit. So the question is, it's okay. I know you're trying to answer. I just want to kind of pull you back just a little bit because I'm not clear on where the line of reason was going, and I think that maybe there was something there. So my question was like, I've got this vicious circle we just talked about. I take that and I stick it in with God in it because you said the symmetry breaker, the thing that makes a vicious circle, not a vicious circle, and a virtuous circle, a virtuous circle, is if I add God. So I've taken that circle, I stuck it down, and I've mixing in the spice of God to it, so to speak. What changes, and is this are we gonna go back into a circle again, the way in which we know that God's the perfect father? Or is it gonna ultimately be circular, or is it gonna be like something different? And if so, what?
Yeah, I think I would change the terminology there. I would say I'm not adding God into things. I would say you need to start with God in the first place in order to even make the claims that we're making right now. I wouldn't,
okay, sure.
you know
So
what I mean? I'm not saying you're.
I've got the pot that's God, and I've got that circle, and I throw that circle in the pot. Okay, what changes about the circle because it's going to give me the reason to think I'm the perfect father is because I've got the perfect father to go by. Well, how do I? But what is the way in which this perfect father? Is that reasoning about why he's the perfect father going to ultimately be circular, or is it going to be something other than circular? Like what's going to change about this? So there's got to be a difference. There's got to be a difference between these two situations, right? That's the idea, because that's what a symmetry breaker means when we say that. So you think that you're saying that if I take that and I throw it in the pot that's God, what changes? Is it going to still be circular, or is it going to be different than circular?
So I think it will still be circular. However, I think the circular reasoning will account for itself, and that you are starting with God as your ultimate foundation for morality, truth, justice, knowledge, uniformity of nature, laws of logic, etc. Whereas the other pot, you're just starting with yourself, and you're saying, hey, I'm a good father because I have good kids. I have good kids because I have a good wife. I'm a good husband because I have a good wife, and a good husband is a good father, or whatever we were saying. With that pot, you don't have any ultimate authority or foundation other than yourself. And that would be my kind of my issue. Like, what is that person's worldview? If that person's worldview is not the Christian God, they're going to have a lot of explaining to do, and they're going to need to provide a lot more answers as to why they do the things that they do.
So two questions kind of arise from these points that
Hmm.
So you're saying that, if I understand you correctly, so a circle without an ultimate foundation is going to not
Hmm.
be. Did you say valid, or how did you put it?
I would say it's. I think it's going to be. I would say that's kind of more we're talking about vicious circular reasoning versus okay circular reasoning. I don't know what to say.
Okay, so we lost him. Come back, Josh. I don't want to lose my train of thought. Come back. Come back. Hold on, I'm gonna post Rose somewhere. GIF. Rose, come back. So I'll just say it because if I go between the different mediums, I appreciate saying to write it down and everything. But if I go between the different mediums, I'll get confused really quickly. So the two questions are going to be something like this. So if a circle is going to be like invalid or something like that, depends on how he like phrases it. Basically, because it doesn't have like an ultimate authority, then and that ultimate authority has to be able to account for itself. Then one of two things is going to have to be the case, right? So like. Um, One, when I say that a circle accounts for itself, that's just what it means to be circular, right? So every circle would account for itself. It just wouldn't be reason giving, right? Like when I say I'm the perfect father. Well, how do I know I'm the perfect father? Because I've got the perfect kids. How do I know got the perfect kids? Because I got the perfect wife. How do I know I got the perfect wife? Because I'm the perfect husband. How do I know I'm the perfect husband? Because I'm the perfect father. This is accounting for itself in the sense that like um, each thing is leading to another. It's if it's true that I'm the perfect father, then ultimately speaking, it's going to go back around to being it's the perfect father, right? So. Um, for every circle would have that quality. So the distinguishing factor has to be that it has to have some sort of ultimate foundation to be valid. But this leads to an infinite regress, right? So if it's the case that God is going to be like the ultimate accounting for our sort of position, but for a circle to be valid in some sense or whatever, it has to have an ultimate foundation. So God is going to have an ultimate foundation. Now, if he says no, God doesn't have to have an ultimate foundation, then there's one of two things is the case. Like, um, his his phone died. I posted you a GIF of Rose saying "Come back" from Titanic. Come back! Come back! I'll just wait for him because I've got it now. So hopefully he'll be here in a second.